We did, see, the hard thing for the Conservation Department to do is to get landowners on board to plant native grass, and the reason being is if the landowner agrees to it, Conservation Department will pay for it, but they can't do anything with that land for 3 years because they have to wait until that native grass is considered established. Okay, most landowners aren't willing to do that because they get no income off that land for 3 years. Well, the experiment was we planted summer annuals at the same time we planted the native grass. And we were going to do a controlled grazing. I was going to hot wire it off into lots, and we would graze it with minimal pressure. The goal was 50,000 pounds of livestock per acre per day. That was the starting point.
Wait, 50,000
pounds of livestock on an acre for 1 day, for 24 hours. And of course I didn't have exactly 50,000 pounds, so I had to calculate how many pounds I had and then figure up the square footage and make the lots accordingly.
You mean pounds of an animal?
Yes.
Oh.
Figure an average cow weighs about 1,200 pounds.
Okay.
Now I grazed heifers. It was about 600-pound heifers that I put on there. And I think there was like 17 or 18 of them. So I had to calculate out how much square footage of a lot based on that number of pounds that I would have to make. And so every one of these steel posts you see going down that one side was the width of each lot. I split this in half, and then I varied it from 30,000 up to 80,000 pounds per acre per day. And we took a look at the results, how much they ate. The idea was one, put just enough, give them just enough that they're going to eat the summer annuals and not eat the new native grass sprouts that were just coming up. Because this was just months after we planted.
Did it work?
This is it right here. And what I discovered is the first 3 days, my cattle had never got a chance to eat soybeans or corn or sunflowers or cowpeas or anything like that. So all they did was go through and pick out the native grass plants that were only about 7 or 8 inches tall and eat those and leave the rest.
Oh no!
The opposite of what we were hoping they would do.
Oh.
And so after the third day, all of a sudden they discovered this other stuff tastes pretty good.
Yeah.
And they switched.
Oh,
they stopped eating the native grass and they started eating the cowpeas and the corn and the sunflowers and all that stuff. So from that point on, it was going pretty good. You know, we varied the pressure, how many pounds based on the size of the lot, and I could control what they ate and what they didn't eat based on how much pressure I put on it. So we did this down this side all the way to the back.
How many acres?
This is 11 acres and that's 9 acres over there. And so we did it on half, and then fall came and I had to sell those heifers. I never got the other half grazed. So the second year I came back in here and I seeded summer annuals again. And I decided to split the field in half the other direction. And what that did was that created a lot. This corner where we're standing was grazed 2 years in a row. The corner back there was grazed the first year but not the second year. That corner was grazed the second year but not the first year. And the fourth corner wasn't grazed at all. So it created a nice experiment where we could compare the third year how much grass we have and what kind of pressure worked and what didn't. Well, the third year came around and we have this beautiful stand of native grass that was even all the way through. You couldn't tell one corner from the other, what had been grazed twice, what hadn't been grazed at all. And except for these first 3 lots right here. The native grass was a little thinner through here, but we still had what they considered an established stand here on this corner, even though this is where they ate the native grass the first 3 days. So
is this fescue?
Yes, it's encroaching on.
Why is
and like
that in here? Oh.
Because of that, them eating the native grass, it's opened it up for the fescue to creep in on here. And what I need
it
to
through all through this?
No,
stick?
no, it's just kind of on.
What was on this field before you started the experiment?
It was a crop field that primarily my uncle planted Sudan grass for cattle to graze, or he'd plant beans or corn. Most of the time, this particular field, he planted something to graze cattle on every year. So this was tilled.
And what native grasses did you plant in here?
Which kind?
Which native grasses did you plant?
Eastern gamma grass, big and little blue stem. The highest production grasses, and we did throw some fords in there, but it's primarily the big production grasses because I wanted to use it for grazing. And this should have gotten burned, but time got away from me. When the weather was right, I was at work, and I just couldn't find the right day to burn it. I've started trying to burn 1/3 at a time.
Where's this area that you were happy with? Because this has so much fescue. Like, should we walk down a little further?
Yeah, further down it gets better as you go.
And then they won't eat this ragweed, will they?
Actually, they will.
They will?
Okay. But it depends on whether you make them eat it or not. You kind of got to train the cows to it. You got to limit their access. You got to do what Mother Nature did by creating a predator and forcing the cattle to mob graze in a group. Now, in the wild with the buffalo, it was the wolves, was the predator and kept the buffalo herds in a tight group. And when they're grazing like that...
Wow, this is so much better.
Yes. When they're grazing in a herd, it creates competition. When a cow puts her head down to eat, she sees a cow on her right and a cow on her left. And she thinks if she don't eat what is in front of her, the cow to either side is going to eat it. So they will eat the weeds and everything in their path. Now, if you just give them the whole pasture, first thing they do is spread out and they selective graze. They just eat the sweetest grass out there. And when the sweetest grass is all gone, then they go to the second sweetest grass. And then the third. But by the time they get to the third sweetest grass, the first sweetest grass has grown back just enough they can nip it off again. And if you allow them to continue to do that, they're going to eliminate that species of grass in the pasture because you're not giving it time to recover. By mob grazing, by hot wiring it off, the hot wire becomes a predator and forces the cattle to graze in a mob or in a group, in a herd. Mm-hmm. And that creates the pressure so that they eat everything in front of them. And the ragweed, the other weeds in here are very nutritious, but they're not as sweet as some of the other grasses. So they're not going to eat it unless they're in that pressure mob situation. And then they'll eat everything in front of them. I did experiment with two pastures side by side, and one pasture I just put the number ahead that pasture could support all year long, and the other pasture I mob grazed. I moved them once a day. Once a day moves. When I was done, the pasture that I mob grazed looked like I'd gone in there and brush hogged it. There wasn't a weed one sticking up. It was a beautiful green pasture about 4 or 5 inches tall. It looked gorgeous. The pasture I just stuck the group in and let them have whatever they wanted. You couldn't tell if there's any grass in there without walking in it and looking down through the weeds because the weeds were so thick you couldn't see the grass in it.
This has a lot of native grass that fits.
Yeah.
And a lot of dickcissels.
Yeah.
Yes.
So they're happy.
Oh, yeah.
That's the whole why you're doing it, I guess.
Exactly.
I don't see a lot of forbs, but maybe,
The forbs are here. They're not as much as what probably someone like you would like to see. But at certain times of year, you'll see certain species that are just thick through here.
The thickened, yeah. Now, that side over there is shorter.
Okay, this is just cool season. This is what we call a sacrifice lot.
That's different right now.
Yeah, that's different. Back on that half back there is 9 acres, and that's native grass like this.
Oh, okay.
Now this winter
this whole thing was your experiment here?
Well, actually both sides were. I grazed bulls on that side and heifers on this side.
Okay.
So part of that got grazed and part of it didn't. Same thing we did over here.
So was Dave pretty happy how this turned out?
Oh my gosh, he was tickled and ecstatic that this experiment worked, and so he put the word out statewide to all of his fellow agents out there, and next thing you know I'm hooking up 3 hay wagons and giving them all a ride. About 2017.
So you've been doing this a while?
Yes.
So is this getting thicker and stronger, or is it pretty much like it was?
It pretty much has leveled out.
Okay.
Now I allow it to mature out and go to seed after the initial grazings to thicken it up. I like to have it thicker because it'll support more cattle, more grazing.
So when will you put the cows back on here?
Not until next spring. Okay. I usually do 2 to 3 grazings in the spring, and then I leave it alone. I let it recoup, regenerate, go to seed, and don't put any pressure on it. I've been grazing my cow-calf pairs on this. the initial experiment I did the heifers, but I run my whole herd through, and I leave my heifers on the cows. I just wean off the bull calves. So I'm running 50 to 80 head through here, and they're only on
11 acres.
They're only on here for a few days.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
only for a few days, and then I move them over to 9 acres, and they're usually a day shorter over there, and then I keep moving them.
Wow.
And because of the management, which my family never did, I'm the first to do this stuff. Everything I do on this farm is different than what the 4 generations before me had done, because I'm trying to manage for production and wildlife, habitat, environmental, better environment, and it works. It's amazing. When I first moved back here, I had to start out with 40 cow-calf pairs, and my uncle said that's too much. And he was right. I spent a lot of money that first year trying to keep those cows healthy and alive. Last 2 winters, I've had 130 head of cattle on this place, and I didn't use any more hay than I did with 40 cows.
Isn't that something?
So I've tripled the carrying capacity of this farm already, and I'm just now getting water lines installed, because before I'd have to create alleys for the cattle to go up to a barn lot to get water, and then they would stand around the barn lot and piss and shit up there when I needed that out here. Okay, by having the water access out here, I can force the cows to stay and deposit all that manure, take all this grass and convert it into something the soil can feed on, and leave all that manure out here on the pasture, and that's what's increased my production. Not only the native grass, but the cool season grasses as well. And it's tripled. I've tripled it already, and I'm not done putting in water lines. I got my second grant, which is installing another 5,000 feet. Well, I got 8,000 feet.
From MDC?
Already. No, from EQIP, from USDA. Environmental Qualities Incentive Program.
USDA, okay.
Yeah.
EQIP, yeah, I
EQIP.
read about that.
Yeah.
Briefly about, and we're going to talk about it some more.
Cover crops, I had a chance to go to Germany because my daughter was stationed there. And when we went, it was January. Well, I wanted to see the countryside and the fields and see how the farmers farm
Yeah,
there
that would
in
be so
Germany.
interesting.
Well, around here, if you got any kind of slope, you have to put in terraces, to prevent runoff and,
Erosion.
losing your topsoil. Well, in Germany, it was a lot hillier in the area of Germany we were in than it is around here, and there wasn't any fields that had terraces. And it's like, how come there's not ruts running down through those fields from runoff?
Right.
Well, the reason why there isn't is because there's always something growing in that field. We were there in January, and most of those fields were green. Now, there might have been a field or two that was brown, but it had something actively growing, planted in that field to hold that soil. So, cover crops, you want to keep the microorganisms in the soil alive and healthy. Are you getting tired? It's like, where are we going? I've never gone this
It's
far.
like your little pet. Okay.
Now, this field in the back before I came along was conventionally farmed,
Okay.
like all the other fields around here by my neighbors, was rented to them, doing corn bean rotation. Wintertime, there's nothing growing in it.
That's what we have.
Every spring, he tilled the soil,
Right.
which burns the carbon out of the soil, which is released into the atmosphere, which is what we're trying to prevent.
Okay.
And by planting the cover crop, see, I plant the rye, and in the spring when I plant the stand grass, I roll the rye down. So it's like putting down a layer of straw. So what it's doing is it's protecting the ground from evaporation, from sunlight. It's creating a better environment for night crawlers, for insects, for the microorganisms in the soil, and it's going to eventually replace that carbon that was burned out of the soil every time it was tilled. And the only way you can do that is by allowing that plant material to decay slowly and naturally. Now, a lot of farmers, when they plant cover crop, they till it in before the next planting. And the reason why they do that is all the nutrition it took to grow that cover crop is now readily available to the next crop, because it will break down in as little as 7 days. And so they get that fertility for the next crop. When I roll it down and sacrifice that crop, I won't get anything out of it for at least a year till it breaks down slowly. Now, this is what I was cutting and baling this weekend. And it kept raining. and kept raining. And I kept having to fluff it up and pet it and trying to bale it. And yesterday,
What was here, Johnny, that you baled?
Sudan grass.
Sudan?
What
is
looks
that
like
native? That's not
this
native,
right
is
here
it?
that looks like corn stalks,
Oh.
that's actually Sudan grass.
Is that native?
No, it's
Annual?
yeah,
Oh,
it's an
it's
annual.
Okay. And that's what they in the bales?
Yes, and when we get back up the house, I'll have you smell it. When you get close to those bales that are wrapped, you can smell it. It smells like potpourri when it starts
Is this
curing.
where you do the cover crop?
Yes,
Oh.
and it's hot and dry. That stuff will grow a foot a day.
Oh my.
And so if the weather isn't cooperating when it's 30 inches tall, it's probably going to be 6 foot tall by the time you get in there and cut it a few days later.
Will this help the ground then, the soil,
Yeah,
by letting it go
that's-
back in?
Because I've tried since Friday, I've tried baling this and unsuccessfully. So since
let
it's
it go
thin
back.
enough, I'm going to do the same thing I did for the rye.
Yeah.
Is allow it to decompose and help build, because I'm trying to build the organic matter. If you see here, this is the straw from the rye. See, when I came through and planted, the drill on the tractor, plus I drug a railroad iron behind me, it just laid it down. So it's just like putting down straw in your garden. And the rye actually prevents the weeds from coming up. See, before if I didn't
Right.
spray any chemicals, whatever I planted would get smothered out by mare's tail and foxtail that grew naturally back here. Well, when I started the rye, I virtually eliminated any need for any chemicals, because the rye choked out the mare's tail. It didn't choke out the foxtail, but the foxtail just added to my tonnage when I baled the Sudan grass, so it wasn't hurting anything. So I didn't have to spray any chemicals. I'm proud of the fact that the last 2 years this field has not had a drop of chemicals.
That's what I wanted you to do. I don't want chemicals.
Do everything naturally. Better for the environment, for everybody concerned.
That's what Dave's going to kind of help me with.